what's inside. Every trial that's endured is 1 degree closer to abundant life. Despite our greatest fears, we embrace whatever comes. The prize is worth our struggles here. For the one who overcomes, despite our greatest fears, we embrace whatever comes. The prize is worth our struggles here. For the one who overcomes, we're not suffering to gain salvation. That's a gift for any who believe. We're not seeking any recognition. That is His alone to be received. Shedding this dead flesh in desperation for the abundant life it brings. We choose to embrace each new affliction in exchange for fellowship with our King. Despite our greatest fear, we embrace whatever comes. The prize is worth our struggles here. For the one who overcomes, despite our greatest fears, we embrace whatever comes. The prize is worth our struggles here. For the one who overcomes, we're not suffering to gain salvation. That's a gift for any who believe. We're not seeking any recognition. That is His alone to be received. Shedding this dead flesh in desperation for the abundant life it brings. We choose to embrace each new affliction in exchange for fellowship with our King. In the darkest night, the fires die down. When the stars give no light, my mind is full of doubt. You whisper to me, fear not, I am with you, and I will carry you through these troubled days. Fear not, I have made you, and my love for you will always be the same. All the times we tried and failed, and all the times we said our sins, only to be dashed against the rocks. And all the time the flesh prevails, despite your sins that drove the nails into my hands. My love for you is strong. Fear not, my son. And suffering is long. My ship runs aground. The waters rise.
everyone. Thank you for joining us on Morning Verses. Before we do anything else, I want to do something that I told my daughter I would do, and I want to show you this art right here. This is something she drew. She said, "This is Daddy, and this is Eiley, and this is our youngest Eli, who has curls." And I said, "Where's Mommy?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I don't know." So that was a little art she made. So I want to encourage you guys to, while you're stuck at home, you might want to think about making some art with your kiddos. So that was just a little fun thing I wanted to tell you about. So we are going to take a look at some verses, some verses that I'm excited about, some really interesting things in the verses we're going to look at today. If you're joining us for the first time, thank you for joining us. We're really excited that you're here. This is just about trying to get our minds in the right place for our day, kind of get focused, help us kind of move in the right direction. And we've been going through the Gospel of John. I love the Gospel of John. It's my favorite book in the Bible. And the Gospel of John's got lots of interesting phrases from Jesus, a lot of interesting statements, a lot of interesting things that he said and did. So we are in John 3. Now you'll remember probably that John 3 has those famous verses, John 3:16. This is Jesus speaking to a man, a religious leader named Nicodemus. And so what we want to do is we want to continue in that conversation. A lot of times on Jesus's conversations, I sort of slow down and take a look at some of the verses a little bit more closely. And so that's kind of what we're doing right now. So we're going to start in John 3:16, but then we're going to read on after that. So let's take a look at that. This is John 3:16. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved." 18. "He who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son." Now, I want to take a moment right here to just kind of make a point that it's my opinion, and commentators have different opinions on this, but it's my opinion that this is kind of the end of the evangelistic part of this conversation. I kind of assume that in this conversation somewhere, Nicodemus began to believe in Jesus. And I think Jesus would have the ability to know when that happens. And the reason why I think that is because it seems to me that what Jesus is about to do is begin to shift to talk about something that is related, but is kind of the next step, so to speak. So let's see what verse 19 says. He goes on and he says, "And this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil." Now, this could really be applied to both unbelievers and believers, right? Because, I mean, even believers, even those who have eternal life, those people who have believed in Jesus, it's possible for us to have bad habits, right? And it's possible for us to kind of have areas of our lives where we sort of protect from the light. Like we have dark shadows that we don't want the light to shine on, because then we'd have to work on that part of our life, right? So this can apply to believers. Now, it can also apply to unbelievers, and in a very real sense, this was what Jesus was experiencing in his ministry. There were people who were in darkness. Jesus, the light, came into the world, and the darkness did not understand it. So really we could see how this can apply to both unbelievers and believers. Now he's going to shift here, I think, to begin to focus, I think honestly, more on the response of those who have believed in Jesus. Notice what he says in 20, "For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed." Now, I think we have to be careful about saying this is talking about how someone gets saved, because notice it's talking about deeds, it's talking about coming to the light. Now, if what we mean by this is coming to the light in the sense that we believe in Jesus, then that's okay. But notice that Jesus is not just talking about belief here, but he's talking about the deeds being exposed. And so once again, I think this concept can really apply to unbelievers and believers in a different sense. So for an unbeliever, it makes sense that there are things that stand between an unbeliever and Jesus more than just whether or not they've believed. There's sins that an unbeliever can be experiencing that make them resistant to considering the whole Jesus issue. Now, once they come to that moment of belief, they are saved irrevocably. They are saved without conditions. But there are sometimes sins that stand between a person and that moment of them believing. And so this can happen for unbelievers. But I actually think that we may be seeing the experience of believers in this statement as much as unbelievers. Because if you think about Nicodemus, what we find out about him kind of later on is that it seems that he's a believer, but that he's a silent believer. And I actually think that he becomes a believer in this conversation with Jesus, but he doesn't begin to talk about his belief in Jesus until much later. And I think the next verse, I actually think Jesus is encouraging him to come into the light, to come out of the darkness in a sense, to begin to speak about his faith in Christ. Notice what it says in 21. It says, "But he who does the truth comes to the light." Now, what would doing the truth mean? Well, the basic foundation for doing the truth has got to be believing in Jesus, right? I mean, we can go on to do other things in the truth, but the foundation of doing the truth has got to be believing in Jesus. And then beyond that, we can continue to grow in discipleship and following Christ. So think about this for a second. He says, "But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen that they have been done in God." Now, I'm gonna take this kind of idea of Nicodemus and sort of being a secret believer and apply it to this, because it's what makes sense to me when I look at this verse. What did Nicodemus need to do once he believed? Now, it doesn't tell us whether or not Nicodemus believed, but I think he did. I think he probably believed here. And I think what Jesus is saying now is, now that you've believed, it's time for you to go public. Do you guys remember that Newsboys song from maybe it was the early 90s called "Going Public"? It was one of their early albums. Really liked that song because it had this concept of like, you're a believer, but don't be a secret believer. You need to go public. You need to come into the light of Jesus, and also come into the light in the sense that you need to be public about your faith. What we find in the Gospel of John is this theme of silent believers, especially in John 12:42, where John tells us that there were many that believed in Jesus, but they wouldn't talk about it. They wouldn't confess him because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. And I think Nicodemus is in that category. Now, this has a pretty important significance for us, right? Because many of you watching are believers. Maybe some of us aren't, but many of you watching are believers, and that is a settled deal. You're never going to go back on that. If you're born again, you're never going to get unborn again. You're always born again. You're always going to be a child of God. But that doesn't mean that your relationship with the Lord is always going to be perfect, and it doesn't mean you're always doing what you ought to be doing in terms of speaking about Him. And so the Gospel of John not only encourages people to believe in Jesus, but it also encourages people to be public about their faith in Him, to confess Him to other people. And so here's what I want us to focus on just real quickly, is this concept of come to the light. Now, if you're an unbeliever, coming to the light for you probably just simply means you need to believe in Jesus. In fact, in chapter 5, we have Jesus using a phrase kind of like that. He says to the Pharisees, "You will not come to me that you have life." And so he uses that phrase sometimes to mean just come to me, just believe in me. But for those of us who have believed, we are kind of on this trajectory, hopefully, where we're constantly coming into the light more and more. And that light does a couple of things. One of the things that it does is it reveals the things in our own lives that we need to change. It reveals that darkness that we so badly want to hide. But also, coming into the light, I think kind of a third meaning in my mind is that we are coming into the light in the sense that the more we're in the light, the more we're open about what we believe. And so that's what I hope for us if you're a believer, that you're not only coming into the light in the sense of getting closer to Jesus, letting his light reveal the cracks and the brokenness in your own life, but also that you're coming more into the light in the sense that you're more out in the open to talk about and to confess your faith in him to other people. So, we've got some discussion questions. Here is our first discussion question. It's this: what implications does this concept have on how we ought to live? Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Go ahead and put your answer, your thoughts, your comments in the comment section of whatever platform you're on, and let's just have a moment or two to discuss this. So, what implications does this concept have on how we ought to live? Let's go to the next discussion question. Another pretty simple one, but I think a valuable one for us to think about is this. It's what ways have you found it difficult to come to the light in your life? Now remember, coming to the light here for us, it can mean that we are drawing closer to Jesus to allow his light to reveal the brokenness and the cracks and the sin in our own life, but it also can mean, in the sense we're talking about, being out in the open, talking about our faith. Those seem to be kind of together. So what ways have you found it difficult to come to the light in your life? Let's just have a moment to discuss that in the comment section of the platform that you're on. Okay, let's take a look at one more discussion question here. Share some successes you've had at coming to the light. And you can take whichever sense you mean. If you mean drawing closer to Jesus to allow his light to sort of reveal the sin in our own lives or the brokenness, or if you mean kind of coming, or if you have ideas on, or stories you want to share on you kind of going public or coming into the light in that sense. Either one is good. So let's just take a second to share a couple of success stories, because I think we're encouraged by success stories. So let's take a couple of moments to share about that in the comment section. All righty, I think that was a pretty good discussion. I see some interesting comments that I'd like to bring some light to on various questions. So I noticed one that I really wanted to read. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Um, in thinking about, this is from Melinda, I like what she said. In thinking about revealing the yuck in my life, I like that term, by the way. I think that's pretty cool. Revealing the yuck in my life. Sometimes that is hard to look at. So she's talking about kind of coming into the light in that sense. Kelly said, prideful self-reliance. Well, that's an interesting one. Just walking in the flesh without power instead of going to Him in dependence. Yeah, definitely. That's something I think we struggle with a lot. Deborah said, I've found that in Celebrate Recovery has helped me to know God still loves me with my brokenness. I am able to share. Heidi said, I find that as I draw closer to Jesus, the more difficult life becomes in certain respects. Continual criticism from the world and Satan tries to draw me away from Jesus. That's really good, Heidi. And one of the reasons I like that is because I think we need to expect that, right? We need to know that that's a possibility, that we're going to run into some resistance. The more we're following Jesus, the more we're coming into the light. In fact, that's kind of what Jesus said, if you think about it, because He said that those who come into the light, they don't want their deeds to be revealed, but in kind of an inverse way, it's sort of like we don't want to come into the light because that means that all those in the darkness are going to reject us because you kind of come into the light as an individual. So that's interesting. Haley said, I was very honest and open about my faith with my neighbor. I think we're talking about successes here. Very open and honest about talking about my faith with my neighbor, Bill, and he became a free grace believer as a result. Way to go, Haley. How cool. Neighbors are hard for me just because it's like, some of my family are my neighbors, but I have this sense of like I want to leave people alone. I don't want to bother them. And so that's a really cool story. That's an encouragement for me. Kelly said, growing in my ability to trust Him and not always give in to my fears. These are great thoughts. I like what Tim said. Tim has a nice, simple idea. He says, also being willing to share the Bible with anybody. And I think Tim also said that he tries to stay faithful in getting in the Word on a daily basis. So there's lots of comments. Feel free to peruse those and see what your other believing brothers and sisters are writing there. So that's really cool. Thank you so much for being involved. Now, what I want to jump to is our guided prayer time. This is something we've been doing for a couple of weeks, and I think it's helping us. I actually have enjoyed it. It's just a guided prayer time based on Jesus's model prayer. So I think most of you have been with us long enough to know what we're doing. So just allow the slides will come up on the screen. I'll play a little music and just take a minute or two to kind of pray through the Lord's Prayer. So let's jump to that. right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Let me tell you what's coming up because there's something pretty special going to happen in just a few hours. Today is Free Grace Women Day. It's not like a national holiday. What I mean is we're going to be broadcasting Free Grace Women in 2 hours, or let's see, at 11 Central. So whatever time zone you're in, remember that we may not be in the same time zone, but at 11 Central, we're going to be broadcasting Free Grace Women. That's my wife, Krista, and her sister, Sarah, my sister-in-law, and they are going to be broadcasting on Zane Hodge's wonderful little book. I read it actually in one night the other night. I couldn't sleep, and I read the whole thing. I was like, oh, it's really good, called 6 Secrets of the Christian Life. So that is going to be happening here just a little while. Then tomorrow, we're doing our debut episode, I guess is what we call it, of Free Grace Kids, a kids show for your kids. So we hope that they will enjoy that. And then this Sunday, we'll be with you on Sunday at 11 Central to do our church service. So we want you to join us for all of those things. You can see freegrace.studio, www.freegracestudio, for our schedule and when we're broadcasting live. Now, I'm going to sign off, but I want to share a song with you, a new song that my brother Levi has just come out of his studio with, and it's called Whatever Comes. I think it's a clever little song, and it kind of fits with some of the things that we've been talking about, and it feels really timely for the things that we're going through. So thank you for watching. We'll see you in a couple of hours if you join us for Free Grace Women. Here's Levi's new song.
We won't go looking for trouble, but we'll be thankful when it arrives. 'Cause no trial should be wasted. It's the fire that forges abundant lives. No, we don't seek to feel the flame, but we're grateful for the changes we find, because pain is an opportunity. It's the fiery forge where gold is refined. Despite our greatest fears, we embrace whatever comes. The prize is worth our struggles here. For the one who overcomes, the goldsmith puts his prize in the fire, because the flame cannot hurt what's inside. Every trial that's endured is 1 degree closer to abundant life. Despite our greatest fears, we embrace whatever comes. The prize is worth our struggles here. For the one who overcomes, we're not suffering to gain salvation. That's a gift for any who believe. We're not seeking any recognition. That is his alone to be received. Shedding this dead flesh in desperation for the abundant life it brings. We choose to embrace each new affliction in exchange for fellowship with our King. Despite our greatest fear, we embrace whatever comes. The prize is worth our struggles here. For the